Thank you so much. I, first of all, want to let you guys know we're a little behind on schedule. Did you know that? So that I won't be done by 1:30, but I promise that we will, how do I open this? It says open, but I don't know what to do. Oh, there it is. Okay. I promise that what we're aiming for is to have lunch and Q&A be done by 1:45. So if you look at your watches at 1:30, that's just because everything, the research was so important this morning. I'd like to take a moment and just acknowledge the staff here at the Desmond who turned this room over so quickly and have served us so beautifully. I need help opening this up. It says switch user, I don't know what to do. What do I do? No, I did it wrong. Oh, wait a minute. Yeah, okay. So, I have a PowerPoint, but let me get started. Thank you. I first want to tell you how at home I feel here at NAMI. First of all, I got to see Dave and Joe from the CIT conference. I have Kate from my state of Connecticut, NAMI. My parents met in the Bronx. I was born in Queens. I went to SUNY Albany. So, like, I'm home. But mostly, and not to mention, I met my friend Marlene, who I haven't seen since Camp Mekong Rec Row in the Catskills, like 40 years ago. So that was awesome. Thank you. I really feel at home here, but mostly I'm feeling at home, as so many have said here, because I'm at NAMI. And NAMI saved my life. I've been fortunate enough to get a chance to speak to psychiatrists, to psychiatric nurses, to families, to consumers, what I used to call PAMIs, people affected by mental illness, until I found out it's a hospital term having to do with heart disease, so there goes that, darn. And I speak after people like we heard this morning with MDs and all kinds of wonderful, MSWs and all kinds of letters after their name. The letters after my name, Randye Kaye, are MRG. Mother who refused to give up. Those are my credentials. So I'm so delighted to have been asked to speak here. I am a family-to-family trainer. I was going to show you my badge. I got the pink thing to put on the bottom. And I was thinking a lot when Matthew asked me to come and speak here about your wonderful theme, Threads of Hope. I love the golden thread of hope. And I got to thinking about threads. See, and threads are nice. Threads can sew on a button. Threads can create a line from one place to another. But threads are most useful when they come in many colors, and threads are most useful when they are woven together. Here today at NAMI New York State, I have heard already threads of research, threads of education, threads of advocacy, threads of support, and when you weave enough threads together, because we are better together, you get a quilted hope. And so my thread, and many of the threads, I was so inspired by what I heard this morning. My only problem would have been if I were a member in your state deciding who to vote for, because the candidates for the board, I just think they were awesome. I never heard so many inspiring stories. If we do it together, we can weave that thread of hope each in our own way. Yeah, everyone knows someone. And as one of the speakers said, I think it was one of the board members who said, we tell our stories. And the way to eradicate stigma is by telling our stories and being open and letting people know what has happened to us and how we feel. So this is my way of advocating. I could stuff an envelope, but there's a lot of things I couldn't do. But I felt that by telling our story, we could inspire others who do what they do so well, educate and advocate and legislate and research and raise funds and all those things that are important. So I wanted to add my name to some of the stories that have helped me so much as the mother of a son who has what I've been told is a very severe case of paranoid schizophrenia, and I'll tell you about that in a minute. We do tell our stories. Some of the books that inspired me are The Day the Voices Stopped by Ken Steele, After Her Brain Broke, The Beautiful Mind, I think is one of the most respectful movies I've seen about schizophrenia. This Stranger, My Son, is a story that is out of print, but I found it. It was a memoir written by a mom who raised her son in the early 60s when everything was about parental blame. Crazy by Pete Early is a great book. You know, this is my story. Ben behind his voices. One family's journey from the chaos of schizophrenia to hope. Now you may say, well, wait a minute, it's Ben's story. But see, it's my story. It's written from my point of view about my son. And my son, by the way, gave me permission to write this story as long as I make it clear to you that he may have a different point of view about the story. So I respect that. And you know, how many of you are married here? Okay, so if you and your spouse were to each write a book about your marriage, would that be 2 separate books? Just saying, all right?
And mine would be right.
I heard stories already this morning from siblings, from spouses, from parents. I don't think I heard any this morning, a child of someone raised by someone with a mental illness, but I know you're out there. So this is my mother's version with input from my son and with input from my daughter and with the experience of living with my wonderful husband, Jeff, who took on this family 7 years ago, knowing that it included a diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenia. Say hey, Jeff, raise your hand. Everybody say hey, Jeff. And by the way, I knew he was a keeper because one of the first things he did was come take my family to family course so he could understand this. Give him a hug, David. So why do we tell stories? Why would I write a book exposing everything that I felt, good and bad? I am not the perfect parent. Because I wanted people to see that behind the symptoms that sometimes cover my son, he is there. That's why it's called Ben Behind His Voices. He has always, always been there, and I think you'll see this in the story. I wanted people to see the family. Yeah, that's my little baby girl, Allie, now married 2 years, and my little baby son. And by the way, Ben is not his real name. He asked me when I wrote the book if I would change his first name, so if you go Googling Benjamin Kaye, I don't know what you're going to come up with, but it's not my kid. But he chose the name Ben, he liked it, and he has given me permission to use baby pictures of himself. So I wanted people to see the person, see the family, and most importantly, to see possibility. I know some of you have already bought the book or read the book, and you know, it's not... Sure, there's plenty of complaining to be done, but it's a book about possibility. It's a book about resources. It's a book about how support and education and NAMI helped us, and there is hope. So I'm going to try and experiment with you. And this is very interesting, because I've tried this among audiences that may not be as educated about the face of mental illness as you guys are. But I have found that when I do this in NAMI, sometimes the results are the same. So I want a gut feeling from you. When you see the picture that I put up, if you think this represents a face of mental illness. So just a show of hands, there may be more than one answer. How many of you think this represents the face of mental illness? Okay? How many of you think that represents the face of mental illness? How many of you think that represents the face of mental illness? Okay, and how about that one? Two masks. Okay, so actually, the only one that doesn't really represent the face of schizophrenia is that last picture, which is really more about multiple personality disorder and having 2 faces. But that first picture is from NAMI, Connecticut, and it is an art exhibit called Voices of Hope, and that is a young girl, 19 years old, who's been hospitalized several times and is showing her artwork, and she's beautiful, and no one would go, ooh, somebody with mental illness. You know, it's not what people think about. That second one, the Aurora Batman Killer, you know, somebody who has suffered with mental illness. but that is what most people think most represents my son. I had a relative say to me, you know, you can come to dinner, but don't bring your son. I'm afraid that someday he may show up at my door with an axe. So above all else, we tell our story to stomp out stigma and to create a place where hope can bloom. That third picture is Eric McCormick playing Dr. Daniel Pierce, who has schizophrenia, in a new series called Perception. We're watching it very, very carefully. I would say it's getting a little more realistic as we go. But it's the first time I've seen somebody with schizophrenia be the hero of the piece, and even though it's a little unrealistic, it's also somewhat hopeful, so we'll keep an eye on it. Okay, so let me tell you a bit about our story. This is me hugging my son Ben. Once upon a time, a hug was all it took to make things go. Would that were still true. Now, there's a person behind that. I'm going to tell you the end of the story. Because if you've read the book, you won't know the sequel. So I'm going to give you the sequel. Those of you who read the book, you'll know it ends about a year and a half ago. So my son Ben is 30 years old. His sister Allie is 27. He has paranoid schizophrenia, and currently is very moved by the video from Voices of Recovery. Okay, my son's not quite there yet. He is not in a place where he has an awareness of his illness. He would not come up here and speak yet about what he's gone through. But he's making steps. Okay, he is back in college after having dropped out of high school. He is taking 6 credits at a time, which is all he can handle, and he knows that. That is huge, because he used to sign up for 15 credits, honors, and then drop out in 6 weeks. He came on the other day, and he said, Mom, I don't understand people who won't do their homework. You mean, don't they want to get anything out of class? Now, 10 years ago, what I heard was, school is a government plot, I know everything already, I shouldn't have to do any homework, so I was like, honey, thank you. He was so, and he just got 100 on an essay. 100, including spelling things right. He is also, now that, when you get to the end of the book, you'll see that that was true, and I say at the end of the book, he may never be able to work, and that's okay with me. He's still worth loving, he's still worth knowing, his life is still worth living. I don't care if he ever makes a paycheck. I am proud to tell you that he, although he just got laid off, which is new news to us for the season, we hope, but he has just been at a job, part-time, for 18 months. 18 months. And we still have to remind him to take a shower, but okay, all right, so 1 year ago, though, he was back in the hospital for his 8th hospitalization and his 3rd relapse in what I call his recovery phase. Let me tell you how it happened. Also not in the book, sequel. So he was living in a group home, which was, to me, very helpful toward his independence, in a residential facility. Very near to us, we saw him every weekend. Once he started doing well at school, and once he got the job, they decided very quickly that he was doing too well to need help. I see a lot of heads nodding. How many of you can relate to that, whether you're living with mental illness yourself? Okay. So, all right, I get it. I understand, you know, attendance-based funding. But what happened was they decided, they said, okay, Ben, so do you want a roommate? And he went, no, I don't want a roommate. I want to live by myself. So they went, okay, great. We'll get you an apartment. You know, you're doing fine. You're presenting well at the meeting. Just walk over twice a day. We'll supervise your meds, and good luck. In 30 days, we'll determine if you need any services. Can you guess what happened? So by the end of that 30 days, he was getting up every morning to call work and tell them he had the flu. So he had that much still happening, still that much connection to the external world. But other than that, holed up in his apartment, isolated, wouldn't open the door when I knocked, and I finally took the police, who, thank God, are CRT trained, to bring him back into the hospital for another relapse. And he would go on, he refused to go on the medication that worked for him, and it took a lot It took a therapeutic alliance, which I am so grateful for, to get him back on his medication. And what it included was, I don't know what the researchers called it this morning, but just working together for the plans. The chief of psychiatry said, I'm not having a meeting unless the mother's there. I am a conservator, so that helped. Yes, I don't care if you call me the mother, that was fine. So we had a meeting. He included me as much as legally possible. He also made it clear to me what legally he could not do, but within those parameters, we consulted with Ben and presented options to him and talked about his goals, and he agreed to go back on his medication. So since then, and at work, they said, now at this point he'd been out 7 weeks. I finally had to go there and say, I gotta tell you what's going on. And you know what their reaction was? Oh, so he's in the hospital, okay, he's ill, I don't care what he's ill with. I don't care, I mean I do care, but in other words, it won't affect his job. You just tell Ben that when he gets out of the hospital, his job is waiting for him. And that meant everything to him. See, recovery, I know I heard some people speaking this morning, and some people may get to the point, and that's wonderful, where medication is, no longer necessary. I think there are some people that can get there. I'm not sure everyone can. Every case is individual. My son, at this point, without medication, I know what happens. I see it. He's in the hospital in 2 days. But that's not the only thing to do with recovery. There is respect. There is purpose, community, and love. In NAMI Family to Family, we talk about stress being the second hit that can trigger schizophrenia. Well, I think in recovery, the second hit to trigger recovery is love. Being loved, being part of something, being part of, in our own voice, in NAMI, being a mentor, being part of peer-to-peer, being part of work. So what that job did was allow my son to have something to come back to when he left the hospital, and he gained another 14 months of employment out of it, and it made him feel so much better. So I'd like you to meet my son. Some people show a picture, I show a video.
I love my mom so much. I love my mommy. I love my mom. I love my mom so much.
Okay, that's over there. What else would you like to sing?
What's mine? I love you. I love you. Now I'm gonna sing.
That's my little baby boy, then. He was and is smart, sweet, kind, loving, gentle, creative, and brilliant. And for many years of his life, many of those qualities were hidden behind the symptoms of schizophrenia. But he was always there. My story here is your story. And so I'm going to tell it to you, but I know you can fill in the details by putting yourself in our place. Sweet, kind, wonderful kid, great to his little sister, gets into high school and things start to go a little nuts. Now, how many of you have raised teenagers? Keep your hands up if they go a little nuts anyway when they're teenagers, right? Okay. So, as one psychiatrist said to me, every teenager is a little bit mentally ill, so it's hard to tell. But in our case, although I had the support of my friends as my son started failing in school, losing his friends, using marijuana, cutting class, and just generally isolating, many of my friends seemed to be going through the same things. But as we got into the junior year of high school, their kids were growing up and my kid was getting stranger. Now, they don't hand you a little pamphlet when your baby is born saying, here's what to look for so you can have early detection of any kind of mental illness. Like any parent, I thought, no, we're having a tough adolescence here. Even when he dropped out of high school in junior year with a plan to wander around the country and search for his father, who, by the way, had disappeared when they were 3 and 5, that's probably our big second hit. Even when he refused to shower, even when, after dropping out of high school, he followed me around the house like a husband who retires too early and doesn't know what to do. And when I got frustrated that he wouldn't help me with the household chores and I picked up the vacuum and slammed it down on the floor because I was angry, he called 911. Even though he got and lost 7 jobs in the 6 months after dropping out of high school, I still didn't know what was wrong. Even though, when looking through his photo album, he picked one up of 2 years prior where his face was completely different. Alert, happy, his arms around a group of friends, and he said to me, "Mom, look at this. I used to be so happy. What happened to me? I need help." And even when we got him help, and even when my ex-husband came back after 12 years of disappearance, which I thought would fix it, nothing seemed to work. Nothing seemed to work. Even when we sent him to a troubled teen program, and he got clean and sober, and did everything by the book, the light had gone out behind his eyes. And I thought, something's really wrong. I found a brochure on my desk, dusty, I don't even know where I picked it up, and it was NAMI. This is what we do. I think I found it somewhere in some office. It was never handed to me, I just found it. How many of you knew about NAMI because someone told you about it? Okay, hands down. How many of you knew about NAMI, you just found it yourself? It's about even. I'd like it to be more, you know, we all would like to be able to talk about NAMI to more people. And while my son was away, I started to suspect that maybe this wasn't just a tough adolescence. And I started to read, and I went to NAMI. And I finally consulted psychiatrists, and one of them said, "Get your son home." Now by this point, he was 18, he smoked marijuana again, he got kicked out of the program, wandered homeless in Idaho for 5 months, calling me and saying, "Mom, there are psychic vampires here and they steal your energy." And I'm thinking, what kind of drug is he on? What kind of drug? So he came home, and then we entered the realm of diagnosis and reality. I'm sure you know it well. Okay, if it's a mental illness, how do we get him to take medication? If it's a mental illness, how do we get him to the psychiatrist? Written contracts, tough love. It took 2 years of trial and error. I'm sure you know how that may be, because it's difficult to diagnose. Finally found the diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenia. And you know what? I knew it before the psychiatrist did, because I read stories. Oh, we heard everything. We heard, you know, your son is actually really psychic, and that's his problem. It's a big burden to have ESP. So, don't give him any medication, just allow him to get back to the world. And I paid money for that diagnosis. We heard, you know, he's just got ADD and he's frustrated, and the problem is you, Mom, are too involved in his life. Just find an apartment in Boston and he'll straighten himself out. My son loved that therapist. We heard it's anxiety. We heard it's OCD. And I know, symptoms, I learned in family to family, symptoms overlap. It's hard to diagnose. But mother blame, I think we can get rid of that, if at all possible. Because how come our other kids are okay? All right, so I found family to family. Boy, I tell you, it saved my life. For me, that education empowered me. My son was finally diagnosed with schizophrenia. And we were trying various medications, and he was trying various ways of not taking those medications. Then, finally, I found a psychiatrist that, I know some people here from Columbia, I consulted with some people at Columbia, and I said, I need to go to the top, who can I go to? And I found someone who not only agreed with the diagnosis, but understood that the family, an educated family, can be an active part of recovery and was willing to partner with us. And we cooked up an idea because Ben really believed if he could only live on his own and get away from Mom, that everything would be fine. So this time we did find him an apartment. And I knew he was either going to succeed because I wasn't budding him anymore, or he was going to fail miserably. Guess what happened? I don't want to say fail miserably, let's just say go off his meds. So then we became the waiting period of when is he sick enough to be hospitalized. I began to be jealous of people who could get into the hospital and get some help for more than 3 days, for more than a week. Yeah. But it's difficult, the system isn't set up that way. But I at least wanted him in there so that I didn't have to be his policeman. So, isolating himself, losing every single friend, and isolating, he was no longer using drugs, not sick enough. Having poetry that looked like that, not sick enough. Staying up all night in the backyard talking to a tree and telling me that he had the secret of life because God spoke directly to him, not sick enough. Calling me and telling me about psychic vampires stealing his energy and that he had stayed up all night wandering down the side of the highway screaming to let his feelings out, and now he feels much better, not sick enough. You know what got him in the hospital? He left his stove on. Because you need an answer to the question, is he a harm to himself or others? 2003 was the year, then turned 21 and was hospitalized 5 times. I could talk to you for an hour about each hospitalization and how kind the Trumbull police officers were to understand that he was in psychosis and not violent, so that we didn't have a crisis on top of a crisis. I could talk to you about the time I went to pick him up, and even though he was taking his medication, he wasn't taking side effect medication, he was frozen, solid, his eyeballs were stuck, he couldn't move his body, and the only word that would come out of his mouth when I finally, almost physically got him into the emergency room and he was staring at the TV was Philip. I'm thinking, who's Philip? That must be his imaginary friend. What's he talking about? And then I look at the TV, and the brand of the TV is Philips. It's the only word he could get out. It was side effects from Haldol at the time. And he was, oh yeah, I'm hearing it, oh yeah. And, it took a while to get to the medication that finally worked, but there's a story that has always stuck with me, because he's always been there behind his voices, and that is the morning of the 5th hospitalization. He's in the emergency room, his hair is matted, he's wearing the same overalls he's worn for a month. I know he's not on his meds. He's staring at his feet. He's mumbling, grimacing, and gesturing, but not to me. And I'm thinking, if this were not my kid, I wouldn't sit anywhere near this person. I would be scared. But I know he's my boy, and I understand at this point what he's going through, and I sit next to him. But he's staring at his shoes and involved in his internal world, and 2 chairs down is an elderly woman coughing very violently. Now, I told you my son is gentle and sweet and sensitive, and so I saw him physically pull himself up out of his internal world, and it takes effort. If you are not living with mental illness yourself, you've witnessed it. I know we can't feel, but if you've ever had 104 fever, or come out of surgery and have morphine in your brain, in your system still, you know how much effort it takes to engage in the outside world. And that is how I feel it must have been for Dad. How much effort and courage it took to break away from everything internal and stand up and look at the woman and say, "Excuse me, ma'am, are you all right?" He came out of his inner chaos to see if someone was all right. And that's my boy. And she looked at him and said, yeah, son, thank you, I'm fine. And he said, good. And then with great relief, it takes effort, he returned. And I thought, he is worth saving. Do not tell me that the person wandering down the road who I used to judge as homeless and why don't you get a job, don't tell me that that person doesn't have a mother somewhere who loves him or loved him. Or who maybe doesn't know how to show the love anymore because they didn't have the advantage of NAMI and education and support and not feeling blamed and stigmatized and alone. Don't tell me that the person in that breakdown room with the padded walls or whatever they call it these days doesn't have a sister or a brother who misses their sibling. Don't tell me that they don't have friends who care about them, or that a spouse who never imagined for better or worse would be like this, or that they don't have a child at home wondering, where's daddy, or where's mom? We are people. We are families and we are people living with mental illness either in ourselves or in someone we love, and we deserve respect, support, research, and an opportunity to tell our stories. I may be preaching to the choir, because you all know that. So finally he was hospitalized. When he was released after that 5th hospitalization, and they finally found the medication, and the right treatment option takes a long time, we know that. Yay for more research. Yay for better targeted research. We'll get there by telling our stories, but the rocky road of recovery, you know it's difficult. This is a little stuffed animal they gave him at his job, and they learned that he was ill. And I put it on my desk because he didn't want to have it in the hospital, and I just stuck a post-it note called "Recovery is always possible" because I needed to see it. I will tell you, Ben just got laid off for seasonal purposes, and I'm watching him very carefully because stress is stress, and we all hate to be laid off from work. And 2 days after the layoff, I said, "So how are you feeling?" And he said, "Well, I can tell you now I was really bummed." And honestly, 2 days later, I'm a little less bummed. So I thought that was appropriate. You know, and he is actually job hunting, and he now has a, you know, a track record, but we're watching because it's tough, you know, for anybody to lose their job. I want to share this. I've never told this story before. Just added these slides. You guys are guinea pigs, okay? While my son was in the hospital, one of those 5 times, or maybe it was one of the 3 times he was re-hospitalized during the relapse road, which was, we all know, is like a game of chutes and ladders. I was going through his stuff from his apartment. I cleaned it out, made him homeless so he could get group help. And I found this box held together by duct tape, as you can see, and I thought, what is this? Now I gotta tell you, my son had hypergraphia. He was writing everything down in the middle of a conversation. He'd be writing it down. In the middle of a movie, he would take a scrap of paper out of his pocket and write stuff down and fold it up and put it back, and you know, that was how he could get stuff out at the time. And, you know, God forbid a memo pad. No memo pad, just scraps of paper everywhere. So this was a box of evidently special pieces of paper. So I opened it up, and the inside says, interestingly enough, the measure of mental health is the disposition to find good everywhere. Ralph Waldo Emerson. And I don't even know if my son knew that that quote was in there, but I thought, oh, okay, this is like, Twilight Zone, you know. And I started trembling, opening up the little pieces of paper. What was I going to find? Was it messages from his imaginary friend Rachel? Was it more scribblings and, you know, arrows and all kinds of things? You know, what would I find in there? And what I found were lists. And on one of these lists was ideas. Ben's ideas for what he wanted to do. And one of those lists was ideas for birthday presents he wanted that he was going to hand to me. Xbox, you know, whatever. It was, okay, lucky ordinary list. Here's ideas. Listen a lot. Blow nothing up out of proportion. Simplify, don't be hypersensitive. Don't judge people. Don't use your muscles, use your mind. Don't use big words. That was something he did all the time, big vocabulary words. Think before I speak or act. Don't try to control others, let them be. reach out to people lovingly, hear and consider others' points of view. Ben had stuff he was working on, and they weren't psychotic. They were a lost kid trying to improve his life. Another list said, get mom to anger management classes. Notice I didn't show you that list. But this little metal box held my son's confusion and his hopes and dreams. And they're still there. He even has friends now. Took 10 years. He is clean and sober, and he finds most of those friends in Alcoholics Anonymous. He doesn't have an alcohol problem, and he likes those people better, so whatever. Says they're more social than the NA people, so I'll take it. It's one of my mantras, I'll take it. So he's always been there. So let's talk about possibility. We need treatment, we need love, community and purpose, and creativity and teamwork. Success can be found in community. This is from Fellowship Place. It happens to be, it's not a clubhouse, but it is a gathering place in New Haven, Connecticut, where they have everything from yoga classes to art therapy to med supervision to a place to smoke a cigarette to a pool table to a place to work in their food service and train for work. It's one of the wonderful, wonderful places. Community and employment and friends are important. NAMI Family to Family taught me what we need for successful recovery. And by the way, we all need these things, period. A safe, stable environment. We just come through the storm and had that threatened for a while, so we know how that feels. The best medical treatments, yes please. See the strengths and the potential. In NAMI Family to Family problem solving, the most powerful question for me was, what are your son's strengths? Because I had spent so much time complaining. And, and saying, we used to be, and now he's, an educated, supportive family. That's what NAMI can provide. We need purpose, work, community, advocacy, education. We need hope, optimism, and a long view. We don't need this, which is an actual newspaper article after a psychiatric facility caught fire. We don't need that. We need this. Stop the stigma of mental illness. So I'm going to gloss over the last slides because I could talk for half an hour, but there are other people who want to talk. So just remember this. You know this, but I want you to know that when I speak at Rotary clubs, the American Psychiatric Association, the U.S. Psych Congress, to remember that we are people. This is an art exhibit. You see on her forehead, I have PTSD. She says basically that it's on my forehead because I feel I do have it, but it took a long time for me to accept it. That, by the way, is the beautiful artist with PTSD of that piece. So she's wonderful, and a great poet as well. So remember that we are people, we are families, and there's our wonderful Joyce, Berlin, a family. She's a mom as well as everything else. We need support and education. Okay, so these are the things. I hope you'll take one of the bookmarks as a reminder. I use this acronym a lot. This is what families need, because I could only speak for families. We need support and education. We feel so alone, and without the facts, we don't know how to help. I got both of those from NAMI. We need to get to a place of acceptance. Support and education help us do that. It doesn't come automatically. But with support and education, I can now look at my son. Look, I have a little pity party once in a while. The radio station that I work at is on the college campus, and when I walk in during orientation day, I go, Ben was robbed, he should have had this. But you can't stay in a place that's self-pity for long. You go there, let it wash through you, and then I go, well, it is what it is. Now what do? We need resilience, because life can be like a game of chutes and ladders, and certainly the recovery process. Communication skills are vital. Probably one of the most important things I learned in Family to Family was to partner with my son, to not try to convince him he has an illness, but just set my limits as a caregiver and family member. I mean, need a sense of humor. I know that sounds dumb. 2 years ago, did you guys have a tough winter here in Albany? I know you always have, I went to school here, and you always have a tough winter here in Albany, but 2 years ago it was particularly hard, and down in Connecticut, we had roofs caving in, and gutters falling down, and there was room on the snow drifts for us to shovel more snow, and people putting their backs out shoveling, and I'm driving down the street of Bridgeport, Connecticut, and I see this. And it lightened my heart. I just think, oh, we're all in this together, like they say in High School Musical. So when my son, who currently is still paying rent in that apartment, but chooses to visit us every day and sleep in his old room, which is fine right now because our dynamic is very different because I don't try to convince him of anything. When he takes his meds, I go, L'chaim. And it lightens the moment. I mean, we're in this together. I'm not there to force him to do anything. I just have the house rules, and the house rules are the house rules. But, you know, humor helps, and we need hope. And that's what we're here doing today. We need these things. It spells out search, and our common threads create hope. Thank you so much for your attention. I wanted to, we will have really no time for question and answer, well, unless you want to. I can stay till 2. How do you want to handle this?
Can we give us 50 minutes? Let's take a vote. All in favor? There you go.
We'll do a little Q&A, but I understand, I know that the schedule is a little different. If you would like me to sign your copy of the book, I will be out there later and I'll be here tomorrow. Just find me wherever I am and I'm happy to sign it. And I will ask that the Q&A, here's what, if you can do us a favor. Q&A can, you know, take a long time, and I'd love it if you would try to keep your questions, so I know you all have stories. I know we all have stories, but if you try to keep the questions quick and for the benefit of the entire group, rather than an individual problem, because I can't solve your problems. But I will be happy to answer a question that you think would benefit the entire group. And then of course I'm going to be here, you can catch me in the hall, but I'm not an expert, I'm just an MRG. So I'm happy to answer your questions if you want to line up in the microphone. I think we'll give it 15 minutes and then you catch me in the hall afterwards, because I don't want to overdo it.